Hello everyone. So we're back again for social psychology, but this time we're going to talk about attitudes. So what attitudes are and why we have them, and then something known as the fundamental attribution error, where our attitudes should potentially be a little different, but we'll get into that. So the very first thing is, of course, what do we mean by an attitude? And essentially what our attitude is it's our tendency to respond either positively or negatively towards a certain person or people, idea, object, situations, anything. So essentially what your attitude is how you tend to feel towards something. So whether it's more in a positive way or more in a negative way. And a lot of times our attitudes are based on information, whether it's from our own experiences, whether it's upon just what's around us, what's in our surrounding. And going back into talking about classical and operant conditioning, that also affects our behavior and our attitudes towards things. But that's what we mean by attitude. It's just, fundamentally, how do you feel towards something? And I keep using words like feel and think and behave towards something. And this has to do with the ABC model, or components of attitudes. And this is the theory out there that what comprises our attitude, what causes us to have these attitudes, is based on three things. It's our affect, which is just our emotional response towards something. So how do we feel about something? There's our behavior, so how we actually act towards something or act because of something. And then our cognition, so just how you think about something. So the idea here, or the example here, the affect is I feel school is important for the future. So that's how they feel about school. Their behavior is that they give 100% when they're studying. They try hard in school. And then their cognition is I think if I do well in school, it will help my future. So chances are they have a positive attitude towards school because of these three components. And so that's kind of one of the theories out there to what forms an attitude and why we have certain attitudes. But when we talk about attitudes, when we talk about behavior, and behavior as a result of our attitudes, it gets a little surprising. Because we have found that our attitudes very often are not a good predictor for how we're going to behave. Unless it's a very specific or a very strong attitude. So something that you feel really, really strongly about, yes, your attitude is going to affect your behavior, or predict your behavior, I should say. But if it's something that you don't feel as strongly about, you can have an attitude towards it, but behave completely different. And one example out there is texting and driving. So there was a study that was done in the University of Kansas, and it found that 83% of the students believe that texting while driving is unsafe. And I believe that, if I asked the class, if I asked you guys right now, chances are you guys would also say, yeah, texting while driving is not safe. We all know that. However, 98% of the University of Kansas students admitted that they do it. So they know it's unsafe. They know it's potentially deadly. Everybody knows that. And yet most people still do it. And so this is an example where, even though we have this attitude that texting while driving is bad and unsafe, that's not predicting that we're not going to text and drive. Because, again, most people still do it, even though they have this attitude. And so this can sometimes cause something known as cognitive dissonance. And this is when we feel uncomfortable. We have this discomfort when our thoughts and our behaviors don't match up. So you feel one way or you think one way, but you act in the opposite. So, a lot of people say that lying is wrong. It's not nice to lie. You shouldn't lie. And yet, people sometimes do lie. If someone cooked a meal for you and it tastes god-awful and they say, oh, how was the meal? A lot of people would feel like they need to say, oh, it was good, it was interesting, to not just be brutally honest. But then sometimes we have this feeling of discomfort because we know that lying's bad, but we just did it. And so we try to do things to reduce that discomfort, because it doesn't feel good when we behave in a way other than how we feel. So again, there's an action or a belief, or you have this action, this belief, they don't correspond, it's inconsistent, which causes this dissonance, which I apologize for the lettering, is this uncomfortable feeling. And we feel more and more uncomfortable because, again, like, we know that we have these beliefs, we have these attitudes, but we're not behaving that way. And so we try to reduce that dissonance. We try to reduce that uncomfortable feeling. And you can only do, really, 3 things. You can form a new attitude, or, you can justify, why you behave differently than how you feel. You can change the behavior, so you can stop doing that thing that goes against your attitude, or, kind of the opposite, you can change that attitude. So going back to lying, you can change the behavior, so you can stop lying. You can change the attitude, so you can say, well, actually, lying is okay. I don't think lying's bad. I think lying has its place. Or you can justify it, like, yes, lying is bad, but when it's a case of not hurting someone's feeling and there's no negative repercussions, lying's okay. So you've justified why there's this inconsistency. That's the only thing you can do. And so there's all sorts of examples out there. Another one is people that are unsatisfied with the state of the world or the state of their country. But then they don't vote. I will be completely honest right now and say that I was one of those people when I was younger. I would not vote, but I'd complain a lot about the state of our country. And it made me feel uncomfortable because I suddenly realized, thanks to my friends, that my behavior was not, it didn't match with my attitude. And so I ended up changing my behavior. That's what I did. Now I do vote. And I implore that once all of you are of the age to vote, that you should. But again, that's just my opinion. But that's just one example. Other examples are things like, do you personally do something to lessen poverty in the country? Because poverty is a horrible thing. There are people suffering, and we know that it's not a wonderful thing to experience. But are we doing anything personally to help? Do you personally do anything to lessen pollution? So again, polluting is wrong. Hopefully a lot of people, or everybody knows this. But are we doing something personally? Are our behaviors matching that attitude? Do you personally express your freedom of speech? Like, all of these are examples of things where a lot of individuals can sometimes experience this dissonance, where we all know certain things that are wrong, but then we don't act upon them, and it makes us feel uncomfortable. And again, there's only 3 things you can do. Change the attitude, change the behavior, or justify why there's that inconsistency. And I can tell you right now, what most people do is they justify. Because that's the easier thing to do. It means that you don't have to change that attitude, you don't have to change that behavior, you don't have to change, but you can find a way to make yourself feel better. And so this is one of those things where, yes, sometimes that is the instance where, sometimes justification does make sense. Like, again, the example I gave for lying. Some people would justify that there are instances where, in order to not hurt someone's feelings, or, when you're talking about, and sorry, spoiler alert, but Santa Claus, to children, you don't want to break their hearts and tell them that, he actually lives in the South Pole, not the North Pole. Because there is no North Pole, sorry. You don't want to lie to your kids about that. And so, there are instances where you can justify it, but there's so many instances where, again, it's easier to not have to change our attitudes, to not have to change our behaviors. One of the harder things to do is to change our behavior to match our attitude. If it's something, and again, that you feel really strongly about, your behavior should match it. So again, social psychology brings up all of these kind of things to kind of make you think, but think about attitudes that you have about stuff, things that you feel is right or wrong, and ask yourself, are your behaviors lining up with it? And if not, why? And are you justifying it, or is it something where there can be a change? So again, I'll get off my podium. I apologize. Moving on. We also have attributions that have to do with our attitudes. And this is when we're explaining why we have, why we behave a certain way, or why other people behave a certain way. So it's explaining the why of behavior. So we've talked about attitudes, we've talked about behaviors. Now we want to know, okay, why are we doing this? And a lot of times with attributions, we're attributing to other people's behavior. So, why did that person just do that? And so there's two main explanations as to how we attribute behavior. There's external factors and internal factors. So you can either think that an individual, the reason why they behaved the way they did was because of something internally, so something about the person, or externally, so something that happened in the environment, something that was outside of their control. And this leads to you can have a situational cause or a dispositional cause. The dispositional cause is that internal factor. It's the person's disposition. It has to do with that person's personality, that person's character. Yes, Lucy, I see the mouse. It's okay. It's a toy mouse, don't worry. And so let's say that there was a car accident. One car hit another car. The dispositional cause, the way that we would attribute that behavior of getting in that car accident, would say, he probably, he's such a careless driver. He never watches out for other cars. What an idiot. That's attacking that person's personality, that character. It's saying the reason why this person got in a car accident is because of the person themselves. It has to do with who they are, and that's why they behave that way. Situational cause, on the other hand, is external. It's saying something outside of the person, oftentimes outside of the person's control. So the way that we would, again, if someone got in a car accident, you would say, he was probably caught in some bad traffic, late for a meeting, just found out that a family member's in the hospital and was rushing to go to the hospital. All stuff outside of the person's control that then led to the behavior of getting the car accident. And the reason why I bring this up is because, yes, Lucy, I do see the rat, or the mouse. I will pet you for it soon. Sorry. My cat makes that noise when she brings me toys. So the fundamental attribution error is so important. It's the tendency that when other people do something, when other people behave a certain way, we almost always attribute it to internal or dispositional attributions. Whereas when we are doing something, and I should say, when we are doing something, it's more internal. So an example of this is, if you are interacting with someone and they give you this nasty look. So, you're walking down, you wave at someone, they give you the stink eye. A lot of times the way that we perceive it is we'll be like, oh, that person's a jerk. Like, we'll automatically assume that we know that person's behavior, we know that person's personality based upon that one behavior, because we're attributing that behavior to something inside. Whereas, let's say that, someone comes up to us and they're like, hey, why'd you get Lucy? Someone comes up to us or a friend and they're like, why'd you give me that look? We'll go, I'm in a bad mood because I just got a bad test exam, We'll attribute it to something external. Because we don't want to say, because I'm a horrible person, that's why I made a face. And so that's the fundamental attribution error. And what's so crucial about this is we need to be aware about this, because we do it all the time. You interact with someone, you see just a small glimpse of their behavior, and so much of the time we'll attribute it to their character, to their personality, and that's not fair. Because more often than not, It's external. It's stuff happening outside of their control. They're having a bad day. Like, we don't know what's happening in a person's life when they behave a certain way. So if you take anything from this, and I'm trying kind of in each of these videos, there's kind of this big thing to take away from it. If you take anything away from this video, it's to give people the benefit of the doubt. When you interact with people and they behave in a way that's not so nice, try to attribute it to something external. Think, okay, what could be happening in this person's life to make them behave that way? That's outside of their control. Because when we attribute it to something external, we tend to not judge them as harshly. We don't need to be judging people so harshly that we barely know. So be aware of the fundamental attribution error. Be aware that, if you interact with someone or something happens, don't automatically be like, oh, that person's such a bleh. Say, okay, what could be happening? This person was really mean to me. Though if they're like incredibly mean, of course, come to an adult, come to someone and report it, of course, all of that. But if it's just, someone that wasn't very nice to you, don't automatically assume that that person, was a mean person at heart. You never know what someone's going through. And the last thing, I swear, that I will say about this is, throughout my life, everyone is always going through something. That is the kind of mentality that I've put upon for myself, that there's always stuff going on in a person's life. I mean, if you think about your own life, chances are every single person that is watching this video is going through some stuff right now, especially now. And so it's not fair to judge someone and their personality and their character on their actions when chances are there's something going on in their life. So to be more understanding, again, that does not mean that if someone is behaving in a negative way that justifies it and makes it okay, but to have a more understanding approach to it can also affect how we then behave upon it. And it can make the world a far nicer place, which we need right now. So, be aware of the fundamental attribution error. Try to see the external explanation for what could be going on in someone's life to make them behave a certain way rather than characteristics. Well, that's it for that. We're going to be on the last part, again, and I'm going through this really quickly, but the last part of social psychology next, which has to do with social interactions, and more importantly, talking about prejudice and discrimination and antisocial behaviors.